Good evening, Chris. Thank you, my friend. And thanks to you at home for joining us on day 2 of the shutdown of the federal government. This is something that has not happened in 17 years. This is a huge deal in American news. Here's how that news looked on the front page at the Virginian Pilot today. That's on the left side of your screen. And at the News and Observer in North Carolina. Out west, this was the Deseret News in Utah and the Denver Post in Denver, obviously. In the Heartland, the Des Moines Register on the left side of your screen there. In Iowa, the Vindicator in Ohio, shut down, lawmakers miss deadline. At opposite corners of the country, the far northwest, the Spokesman Review from Washington State, deadlocked Congress shuts down government. And then the Tampa Tribune in Florida, government on shutdown. Of course, from here in New York City, here was the New York Daily News, whose cover I am not totally sure I'm allowed to show on television. If I am breaking a rule or just ooghing you out by showing the Daily News House of Turds cover from today, I'm sorry. Sorry. But that is the news. This is a historic day. This is not a good news day, but it is a big news day. And if you are a news junkie or a politics junkie, this is the kind of day where you save the front page of the paper, right? When I was leaving Washington to come back to New York this morning, I picked up the print versions. I never pick up the print versions anymore. Picked up the print version of the Washington Post and the New York Times with their big shutdown stories today. Shut down in big type, right? But I also picked up the Washington Times, which is a conservative newspaper. They're a really conservative newspaper. They really only market themselves to conservatives. So the one big in-house ad that they've got in the paper today is this one, which is selling Washington Times T-shirts that say, conservatives are cool. And the O's in the hipster glasses, conservatives are cool. You know it when you read the Washington Times. The only other large-scale ads they have in today's paper are this half-page ad for right-wing talk radio. They advertise 8 talk radio shows, and all 8 of them are old right-wing white guys. 8 for 8. They also have an expensive wraparound front page ad, wraps around the whole front page outside of the newspaper. Must have been really expensive. I don't know. It's the Washington Times. Anyway, it's for the NRA. The 3rd century of the NRA, and it highlights this inspiring story of a young woman with a gun who says she wants to grow up to be an NRA lobbyist. Aww. Today, the Washington Times also published a hair-on-fire letter from the conservative game show host Chuck Woolery, warning that the UN is encroaching on our national sovereignty. There's one book review in the Washington Times today. It's of a biography of FDR, and the Washington Times reviewer gets so worked up in condemning the predations of FDR as a sexual adventurer. Wow, really? That the Washington Times reviewer sort of forgets to review the book. Yes, this is technically a book review of a biography, but did I mention how terrible FDR was? The conservative media exists not just on Fox and on AM talk radio. Conservative media exists in print. And it is just as weird there as it is on TV and on the far side of your radio dial. It is a completely different universe to the rest of the media world, at least. So where the rest of the world is marveling today at shutdown, the largest government on earth for the first time in nearly 20 years is shut down. On that day, here's the shutdown front page of the conservative paper. Look at their front page. Obamacare drama. Which maybe has something to do with abortion. There's apparently a problem in Washington right now that has something to do with Obamacare and too much abortion. Yes. There is mention of shutdown on the front page of the Washington Times today. They put it in the same font and the same type size as, look, it's up top. There it is. Same as the date of the paper. See, right there below the date? See where it is? Yes, technically there it is. No need to make a big deal out of it. It's shut down. The one in-depth article they do have on this minor issue of the government shutdown is on the inside pages of the paper on page A6. And as you can see from the headline there, it is all about how it is really no big deal. Shutdown poses little threat to national economy. It's not so bad. Nothing like the Obamacare drama. Something abortion. A trip to conservative media land right now is a trip to a very different experience than the rest of the country thinks we are having with this historic government shutdown. At the Fox News channel, for example, They are not calling it a shutdown of the federal government. At Fox News Channel, they are calling it a slim down of the federal government. Not a shutdown at all, a slim down. And as these things do, what happens first in the conservative media is now crossing over into official Republican politics. And so now the Republican Party's Senate campaign committee is saying it's not a shutdown at all. It's not a slim down even. It's a slow down. Slow down, slim down, take a load off. There's no crisis here. This all sounds kind of good. At the conservative magazine, The National Review today, they want you to know that, look from the headline, this is not actually a shutdown. At the Daily Caller, conservative website, they do admit it's a shutdown, but only because they have found 11 reasons to love the government shutdown. It's awesome. Taking a field trip to conservative world today is taking a long, strange trip away from what a shutdown of the federal government means in the rest of the country. It is different there. And in some ways, it is literally different there. These are the 80 Republican members of the House who wrote to House Speaker John Boehner just over a month ago, demanding that Speaker Boehner shut down the federal government, demanding specifically that he make the funding of the federal government contingent on dismantling health reform. The letter was spearheaded by a freshman congressman from the most Republican district in North Carolina, and he got 80 signatures on that letter from himself and his Republican colleagues before he sent the letter to Speaker John Boehner demanding a shutdown. Of the 80 Republican members of Congress who signed this letter, 79 of the 80 are white, 76 of the 80 are male. Your average House district in America is 63% white. These guys' districts are 75% white. Overall, Latinos are 17% of the average House district, but for these guys' districts, it's less than 10%. You might recall that a man named Barack Obama won the last presidential election by millions of votes, but not in these guys' districts, not even close. Even as the president won overall and by a pretty large margin, in these guys' districts, President Obama lost by an average of 23 points. Republicans in the states have gerrymandered these districts so that they are essentially pure Republican. In order to get them that way and keep them that way, they have to keep making them whiter and whiter and whiter. If they could make them more male, I'm sure they would do that too. But white works for now. Lower education levels work. Fewer Latinos, fewer blacks, all of that is crucial, and they have to be rural. In order to create districts that safe for these guys, Republicans have had to create districts for themselves that are less and less diverse over time, even as the rest of the country gets more diverse. Ryan Lizza wrote this up this week for The New Yorker once it became clear that these 80 Republicans who signed this letter were getting exactly what they asked for. Crunching the numbers, he found, quote, these 80 Republican members represent an America where the population is getting whiter, where there are few major cities, where Obama lost the last election in a landslide, and where the Republican Party is becoming more dominant and more popular. Meanwhile, in the rest of the country, in our actual national politics, each of these trends is reversed. So the faction that is driving the government shutdown, that demanded it from John Boehner a month ago and now has it exactly on the terms they demanded, they represent geographically specific slivers of the country that were specifically shaped, specifically chosen, specifically designed to be very white, less educated, almost entirely rural, and as close as you can get to 100% Republican. None of those districts is competitive. From their perspective, from those districts, it is utterly rational for those specific members of Congress to want a government shutdown, sure, to want the most confrontational stance they can possibly take toward this president who is so unpopular in their districts. It is politically rational for those 80 members of Congress to want a shutdown. But why is it rational for the Republican Party to let those folks drive for the whole party and the whole country? Yes, there are 80 Republican members of the House, at least, whose narrowly drawn districts make a shutdown seem like good politics. They're never going to go home and listen to an angry town hall about why did you shut down the government? Why were you too confrontational with President Obama? The only anger they're ever going to hear is if they didn't go far enough. If someone wants to poll on secession from the country in those districts, I bet you'd find some eye-opening results there as well. It has always been the case that there is a minority of folks in the Congress whose interests are locally rational but extreme for the nation. The question is why that group is now setting policy for the whole party and therefore for the whole country. And what would you do right now if you were a Republican who did not agree with those folks in your own party? What would you do, even if you were a conservative? If you were a conservative in the Republican Party right now and you did not agree that there should be a shutdown, inside your party right now, inside the House, what would you do if the agenda that was being followed was the agenda of those 80 members of Congress who will never, ever, ever have to answer for shutting it down? What would you do if you didn't agree? Joining us now is one of only 10 Republicans in the House of Representatives who says that we should just pass a clean, standalone bill to fund the government and stop the shutdown. He represents a district in Virginia that is home to one of the highest proportions of military personnel in the whole country. Conservative Republican Congressman Scott Ridgell, thank you very much for being with us tonight. I really appreciate you willing to talk about this.
Happy to do it, Rachel.
Let me just start by asking you something that I think the whole country is wondering about, and maybe you as a House Republican, you know, even though we don't. How long do you expect this shutdown to go on? Do you see a way out yet?
Well, it'll probably go on a few days. I hope it stops tomorrow. I certainly listened to your introduction. If I may say that the gerrymandered districts, you're on to something there. Now, you only got it half right because, there are some districts that are skewed hard R's, but conversely, there are just as many that are skewed hard Democrat.
Sure,
and
right.
so I tell you, both sides have contributed to the dysfunction that we have up here. I really believe that gerrymandered districts are the principal cause of gridlock in Washington, and we've got to get away from this, and I'm committed, whether in office or not. Next time we have these redistricting efforts, certainly in Virginia, we've got to do something about this. It's not right for our country.
If we did nonpartisan districting, some states do that. Not every state works the way that we've seen in these intensely partisan processes. If we had some sort of national standard for expert redistricting and district line drawing that was not done by one of the parties to their own advantage, do you think any Republicans would support that?
Well, they've got to. Look, I tell Americans in our district, look, we've got to be involved in this process because we really can't continue this way. And Rachel, some of the things that you said I agree with, but some I really sharply disagree with. That won't surprise you.
Yeah.
You know, those 80 members that you said are absolutely committed to a shutdown. I disagree with that. I've never heard that privately or publicly. You know, we don't have a regular appropriations process here anymore, and not since I've been in office in 33 months. The House has been dysfunctional. The Senate has been dysfunctional. I blame both parties, both houses of government. We went on a 5.5-week break when only 4 of our 12 appropriations bills have been passed. The Senate hadn't even passed one of the 4 that we did send over there. So what do we end up with? Continuing resolutions. They harm our country. And they're not right. And so we were trying to express our best ideas for policy via the continuing resolution. I was one who was saying, look, I don't think that we ought to advance the Affordable Care Act. I got a call just yesterday from a union member who was upset. I thought he was going to be upset with me. He said, no, I'm upset with this law because it's affecting his health care. So I think a delay certainly was in order, and I'm sorry we didn't get it.
But I understand that you and I would disagree, and a lot of Americans would disagree about the health of the budget process and how the parties in each House of Congress is proceeding. But where we're at right now is pass a continuing resolution that doesn't make policy, that just is a continuing resolution, or the government stops. You obviously believe it's not worth stopping the government.
Well, that's true.
In order to try to force policy into this process. But why I mean, you are one of 10 Republicans who has said this is the way to go, that we shouldn't have the shutdown. That's less than 5% of your caucus. Why don't more Republicans see the shutdown as too costly?
I think there's more. I look at it this way. We are down to the lift that we were trying to get across the curb here was the delay of the individual mandate. We'd given up lots of things. We'd actually made major concessions along the way, and I was disappointed, maybe not surprised, but disappointed that the Senate basically told us to pound sand. Really, I thought we were negotiating and trying to, in a good faith effort, to advance something, but we got down to the individual mandate, a 1-year delay, plus the stopping the subsidies of health care for members of Congress and staff. Both things I think ought to be advanced. But we have to consider the trade-off, which is a lot of pain economically, damage to our military, and to me, it just didn't make sense to us to continue to hurt our economy and our men and women in uniform to advance those 2 goals. We'll fight another day, but I do think we ought to stop where we are now and go ahead and fund the government and get us back on track.
I hear you when you say that what you have to balance now is the cost of not moving ahead versus moving ahead. Whether or not this was the right place to be negotiating over Obamacare, I think is someplace where we would dramatically disagree. But where we stand right now, you are one of a few Republicans who actually is trying to get us out of this shutdown. And I appreciate your willingness to explain your point of view to us tonight, Congressman.
Sure thing.
Thank you, sir. I appreciate you being here.
Thank you so much.
Congressman Scott Ridgell of Virginia.